The Arizona desert wind is unforgiving. It carries sand that cuts the skin, sucks moisture from the body, and buries the tracks of anyone who dares to cross that land without knowing it. Many men died in that desert, some from thirst, others from hunger. The majority, arrogance. Samuel Briggs knew that desert as he knew the lines of his own hands, every rock formation, every hidden water source, every trail that snaked through the cacti and red rocks. He had lived there for 12 years, long enough to learn that the desert was not an enemy to be conquered. He was a master to be respected. His cabin was at the foot of a canyon where a spring gushed from the rock and created a small oasis amid the desolation. It was a place that few knew about and even fewer could find. Samuel liked it that way. Loneliness was his most faithful companion. He had been many things before becoming a desert hermit, soldier, buffalo hunter, cattle driver. But all those lives seemed to belong to another man now, a man he would rather not remember. That September afternoon, the sky was very clear, deep blue without a single cloud. Samuel knew what this meant. The heat would be brutal for the next few hours. He finished feeding his horse, checked the water level in the trough, and prepared to spend the rest of the day in the shade of the cabin. That's when he heard it, a faint sound almost swallowed by the wind. It could be an animal. An injured coyote, perhaps, or the cry of a hawk hunting on the rocks. But something in the tone of that sound made Samuel stop. He was human. He grabbed his rifle out of instinct, not out of fear, but out of caution. In that territory, an unarmed man was a dead man waiting to happen. He walked in the direction of the sound, skirting the large rocks that surrounded his property. And then he saw it. A boy. He couldn't have been more than 13 or 14. He was lying between two rocks, his body bent in an unnatural position. His skin was dark, sunburned. His long black hair was matted with sand and dried blood. Navajo. Samuel immediately recognized him by his clothes, his ornaments, and the shape of his face. A Navajo boy, alone, in the middle of the most unforgiving desert in the territory. Samuel approached slowly, rifle still in hand. The boy didn't move. His eyes were closed, his breathing was shallow and irregular. As Samuel crouched down beside him, he felt heat radiating from his body. Fever. High. He examined the boy quickly. There was a deep cut on his left leg, which was infected and swollen. His right ankle was sprained, perhaps broken. And dehydration was evident in chapped lips and skin that had lost all elasticity. This boy was dying. Samuel didn't think twice. He put the rifle behind his back, lifted the boy in his arms, and walked back to the cabin. The boy was too light for his age. Skin and bones. How long had he been lost in that desert? Days, at least. Maybe a week. Inside the cabin, Samuel laid him down on his own bed. The only bed he had. He turned on the stove and put water on to boil. He grabbed the few medical supplies he kept for emergencies, clean cloths, a bottle of whiskey that served more as an antiseptic than a drink, needle and thread. The cut on the leg was the most urgent. Samuel cleaned the wound carefully, removing the dirt and pus that had accumulated. The boy groaned, still unconscious, but didn't wake up. The infection was serious, but it had not yet spread to the blood. There was hope. He sewed up the cut with tight stitches. Then he bandaged his ankle, immobilizing it between two wooden boards. Finally, the slowest and most important work began. Hydrate the kid. Drop by drop, he dripped water onto his chapped lips. The boy's body absorbed the liquid with desperate thirst. Samuel continued for hours, patient, constant. When the water became warm, he cooled it. When the boy coughed, he waited and started again. Night fell. Stars appeared in the desert sky, brighter than anywhere else in the world. Samuel lit a lamp and continued his work. He changed the damp cloths on the boy's forehead to reduce the fever. He checked the wound to make sure it wasn't bleeding. More water dripped, always more water. Sometime before dawn, the fever began to break. Samuel allowed himself a sigh of relief. He wasn't out of the woods yet, but the worst was over. The boy was going to survive. He sat in the chair next to the bed and, for the first time in many hours, closed his eyes. Not to sleep, just to rest. His body ached from the exertion, but his mind was strangely calm. Who was this boy? Where did he come from? How had he ended up alone, injured, lost in the middle of nowhere? The questions could wait. For now, what mattered was keeping him alive. The boy woke up in the middle of the next morning. Samuel L. was outside, feeding the horse when he heard a noise coming from the cabin. He quickly entered and found the boy sitting on the bed, eyes wide, body tense like a cornered animal. Calm. Samuel said, raising his hands to show he was unarmed. "You are safe." The boy didn't respond. His eyes swept the cabin, assessing every corner, every exit, every object that could be used as a weapon. Survival instinct. Samuel recognized that look. I had seen it in men who had been through terrible things. "You were hurt," Samuel continued, keeping his voice calm and low. "I found you in the rocks. I treated your injuries. You're in my cabin." The boy looked at his own leg, bandaged and immobilized, then to the ankle, then to his hands, which were still shaking with weakness. "Water," Samuel offered, holding out a glass. "You need to drink." The boy hesitated, his eyes fixed on the glass, then on Samuel's face, looking for something. Threat. Deception. Trap. Found nothing. He took the glass and drank, slowly at first, then more urgently. When he finished, Samuel filled it again, and again. Only on the fourth time did the boy stop, taking a deep breath. "Thanks." The voice was hoarse, almost a whisper, but the English was clear. Samuel nodded. "You speak English?" "I learned," the boy said, "at the white men's school." There was something about the way he said it, a weight, a bitterness. Samuel knew the stories about these schools, places where indigenous children were forcibly taken, forced to abandon their language, their culture, their identity, places of cruelty disguised as civilization. "What is your name?" Samuel asked. The boy hesitated again. Then he responded, "Ashkey. It means boy in the language of my people. And your name at school?" The boy was silent for a long moment. His eyes darkened with a shadow of pain. "They called me John, but that's not my name," Samuel understood. "Ashkey, then." The boy nodded. Something changed in his expression. A fraction of the tension dissipated. Samuel pulled out the chair and sat a respectful distance from the bed, not too close to appear threatening, not too far to appear indifferent. "What happened to you, Ashkey? How did you end up in the desert alone?" Ashkey looked away. His fingers tightened on the blanket covering his legs. "I ran away," he said finally, "from school. Many days ago. I don't know how many. Where did you run away?" "Home, for my people, but I got lost. The desert is different from what I remembered. Or maybe I forgot. It's been 3 years since they took me. 3 years." Samuel felt something tighten in his chest. 3 years away from his family, his land, everything he knew. And yet, the boy had tried to come back. Alone, on foot, through the deadliest desert in the land. Was this courage or desperation? Maybe the two were the same thing. "Where's your village?" Samuel asked. Ashkey described the location as best he could. "A canyon to the north, a rock formation that looked like a sleeping bear, a river that dried up in the summer but returned with the rain." Samuel knew the place. It was 3 days' journey away on horseback. For an injured boy, on foot, without water or supplies, it was a death sentence. "You wouldn't have made it," Samuel said, without cruelty. "Just true. The desert would have killed you before you got halfway there." Ashkey didn't respond, but his eyes flashed with something that could have been tears, or could have been anger, maybe both. "Rest," Samuel said, standing up. "You are still weak. We need to take care of this wound before thinking about any trip. Will you take me back?" Ashkey's voice was cautious. "To school?" Samuel looked at the boy. He saw the barely concealed fear in his eyes, the terror of being returned to that place, the certainty that, if that happened, he would try to escape again, and again. "Until you succeed, or until you die trying?" "No," Samuel said. "I won't take you anywhere you don't want to go." Ashkey studied him for a long moment, looking for the lie, the trick, the betrayal that was sure to come. Found nothing. "Why?" the boy asked. "Why are you helping me?" Samuel thought about the question. I could give a simple answer. Because it was the right thing. Because any decent person would do the same. But he knew it wasn't true. Not everyone would do the same. Most wouldn't. "Because I know what it's like to be lost," Samuel said finally. "And I know what it's like when someone finds you." He didn't explain further. He didn't talk about the years he spent wandering after the war, without purpose, without hope. He didn't tell him about the old miner who found him half starving in the mountains and took care of him for weeks until he regained the will to live. He didn't talk about the debt he had been carrying since then, the certainty that if he ever had the chance to do the same for someone else, he would do it without hesitation. Some stories they didn't need to be told. Just lived. The second day was easier. Ashkey was stronger. The fever had completely disappeared. The leg wound was healing well with no signs of new infection. His ankle still hurt, but he was able to put some weight on it. Samuel prepared a hot meal. Beans, dried meat, bread that he had baked himself the week before. Ashkey ate with an appetite that showed his body was recovering. Between meals they talked, or rather, Samuel asked questions, and Ashkey answered, first cautiously, then with growing confidence. The boy told about his village, about the horses his father raised, about his mother who made the most beautiful blankets in the entire region, about his younger sister, who was only 7 when he was taken and would now be 10. Did she still remember him? He told about the school, about punishments for speaking your own language, about the food that was never enough, about the cold nights in the dorms where boys cried in silence because crying loudly meant more punishment. And he told about the escape, the window he discovered didn't lock properly, the moonless night you chose to leave, the first days of freedom when every step felt like a victory, and then the headquarters, the hunger, the cut on his leg when he slipped on a rock, the growing despair of realizing that I was lost. Samuel heard everything without interrupting. When Ashki finished, the silence in the cabin was heavy but not uncomfortable. "Your people must be looking for you," Samuel said. Ashki nodded. "If they know I ran away. The school may not have told you. They don't like to admit that they lose children. The way he said it, they lose children. As if they were lost objects, not human beings. If they are looking, they will find it," Samuel said. "Your people know this desert better than anyone." "You know," Ashki noted. "You live here." "I learned," Samuel admitted. "But I will never know this land like someone who was born on it. There are things that cannot be learned, that are inherited." Ashki seemed to consider that. Then he asked something that surprised Samuel. "Why do you live alone?" Samuel didn't respond immediately. It was a simple question with a complicated answer. Or maybe it was a complicated question with a simple answer. "Because solitude is more honest than most people's company," he said finally. Ashki nodded as if he understood perfectly. And maybe he would understand. Perhaps 3 years in a school where it was forbidden to be who he was had taught the boy more about the dishonesty of men than Samuel could have imagined. The night of the second day was peaceful. Ashki slept on the bed, Samuel on a makeshift mattress on the floor. Before turning off the lamp, the boy said something in Navajo, a short, melodic phrase. Samuel didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone, gratitude. He turned off the light and lay awake for a long time, listening to the boy's breathing become slow and regular. Outside, the desert wind sang its eternal song, and somewhere in the hills, a coyote howled at the moon. The third day started like the others. Samuel woke up before dawn, lit the stove, and put water to boil. Ashki was still sleeping, the deep sleep of someone who is still recovering. Samuel went out to look after the horse and check if there were any signs of rain on the horizon. The sky was clear, as always, but something felt different that morning, a tension in the air that he couldn't explain. And then he saw it. Atop the highest hill, silhouetted against the dawn sky, stood a figure on horseback. Property. Observing. Samuel felt every muscle in his body tense. His hand instinctively went to the revolver on his hip, but he didn't get it, just waited. The figure did not move. For long minutes, nothing happened. Then, another figure appeared next to the first, and another one. Within minutes, there were at least 20 horsemen at the top of the hill. All properties, everyone watching. Navajo, Samuel knew. They had come to get the boy. He took a deep breath and did something that went against all his survival instincts. He raised his hands, showing that they were empty, and walked towards the hill. Halfway there, he stopped, waited. One of the riders separated from the group and began to descend. His horse was magnificent, black as night, with a mane that shone in the sun. The man riding it was old, but he sat straight as a spear. His face was a mask of authority, sculpted by decades of leadership. The boss. It had to be. He stopped a few meters from Samuel. His eyes, black and penetrating, studied the cowboy with an intensity that seemed to see beyond the skin, beyond the bones, to the very soul. When he spoke, his voice was deep and charged with power. "You have something that belongs to my people." It wasn't a question. It wasn't an accusation. It was simple, meant a fact. Samuel nodded slowly. "There's a boy in my cabin. I found him injured in the desert 3 days ago. I treated your injuries. He is recovering." The boss did not respond immediately. His eyes remained fixed on Samuel, evaluating every word, every gesture, every breath. "Why did you do this?" "Because he was dying," Samuel said simply. "Many white men would have let him die," the boss said. "Some would have hastened his death. I'm not a lot of white men." The boss considered that. Something changed in his expression. It didn't soften exactly, but it has lost a fraction of its toughness. "I want to see the boy." Samuel nodded. "Follow me." He turned and walked back to the cabin. He could feel the boss right behind him, and he could feel the eyes of 20 warriors on his back. One wrong move, and he would be dead before he hit the ground. But he didn't make any wrong moves. In the hut, Ashki had woken up. He was sitting up in bed, eyes wide, body shaking, but not out of fear, of emotion. "Grandmother," he said in Navajo, his voice breaking. The chief crossed the hut in 3 long strides and knelt down in front of the boy. His hands, large and calloused, held Ashki's face with a tenderness that contrasted with his entire implacable warrior appearance. They spoke in Navajo, fast, intense, full of emotion. Samuel didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. The relief of finding someone who was thought lost. The joy of a reunion that seemed impossible. After a few minutes, the boss stood up and turned to Samuel. My grandson tells me you saved him. Who took care of his wounds? Who fed and protected him? I did what any decent person would do, Samuel said. The boss shook his head. No, you did what few would do. My grandson ran away from the white men's school 12 days ago. He walked through land where other white men live. None of them helped him. Some persecuted him. One shot him. Samuel felt his blood boil. Shot a child? The bullet missed, the boss said. But fear made my grandson run into the desert away from the paths he knew. That's how he got lost. Ashki stared at the ground, reliving memories that clearly still haunted him. We looked for him for days. The boss continued. Our best trackers followed their footsteps until the desert erased them. We thought he was dead. My daughter, his mother, hasn't stopped crying since we lost track. He looked at Samuel with renewed intensity. And then we found new tracks. Yours? Taking it here? We came prepared for war. Prepared to recover my grandson's body and avenge his death. The boss paused. Instead, we found him alive, careful, fed, in peace. Samuel didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. The chief walked until he stood in front of him. They were almost the same height, but the old warrior's presence seemed to fill the entire cabin. Do you know who I am? Samuel shook his head. I am Hastin Tso. My name means great man in the language of your people. I have been leading my tribe for 40 years. I fought against the Spanish when I was young. I fought against the Mexicans when I was a man. I fought against the Americans when they came to take our land. He paused. I've seen a lot in this life. I saw cruelty that would make strong men vomit. I saw kindness that would make hard men weep. I learned to recognize both. His eyes pierced Samuel. What do I see in you? Samuel held his gaze. I don't know. I only know what I did. The boss nodded slowly. That's a good answer. Men who know too much about themselves are usually lying. Men who know only their actions are generally telling the truth. He turned and said something in Navajo to Ashki. The boy nodded and, with effort, began to get up from the bed. Samuel started to help, but the boss raised his hand. He needs to do this alone. It's part of becoming a man. Ashki stood on his good leg. He walked slowly to Samuel and stopped in front of him. Thanks, the boy said. For everything. Samuel nodded. Take care, Ashki. And don't try to cross the desert alone again. For the first time since he arrived, the boy smiled. A small but genuine smile. I won't need it. I'm going home. The chief placed his hand on his grandson's shoulder and guided him out of the hut. Samuel followed them. Outside, the other warriors had come down from the hill and were now surrounding the hut. Their faces were impassive, but their eyes followed Samuel's every move. Hastin Tso helped Ashki onto a horse that one of the warriors had brought. Then he turned to Samuel one last time. You gave me back my grandson, he said. This is a debt that cannot be paid with gold or horses. I don't want payment, Samuel said. I know. Therefore, the payment will be even higher. The chief made a gesture, and one of the warriors approached, holding something in your hands. It was a necklace, silver and turquoise, worked in an intricate pattern that seemed to tell a story. This necklace belonged to my father, Hastin Tso said, and to my father's father before him. It is a symbol of friendship between our people and those who carry it. He held out the necklace to Samuel. Use this. Any Navajo who sees you will know you are a friend. Your lands will be respected. Your animals will be protected. If you need help, it will come. Samuel took the necklace. The weight was heavier than I expected. Not just the physical weight, but the weight of meaning. I don't know if I deserve this. Deservingness is not something we decide about ourselves, Hastin Tso said. It is something that others see in our actions. He mounted his horse with the agility of a much younger man. He looked at Samuel from above. There is one more thing. Samuel waited. If you ever tire of loneliness, there is a place for you among my people, not as a servant, not as strange, like family. Samuel felt something tighten in his throat. He couldn't respond. The boss seemed to understand. He nodded once, then turned his horse and rode away. The other warriors followed him. Ashki looked back one last time and raised his hand in farewell. In a few minutes they had disappeared among the hills. Samuel stood in front of his hut for a long time. The necklace was heavy in her hand. The silence of the desert filled his ears. He thought about everything that had happened. In the dying boy he had found in the rocks, on sleepless nights taking care of your wounds, in the conversations they had, upon the arrival of the warriors, in the words of the boss, family. It was a word he hadn't heard in a long time, a word that had lost its meaning somewhere between the battles and the losses and the years of chosen solitude. But now, holding that necklace in her hand, the word seemed to take on a new weight, a new meaning. He put the necklace around his neck, The silver was cold against his skin, but it soon warmed with the heat of his body. Inside the hut, the bed still bore the shape of where Ashki had slept. The blanket was still wrinkled. The glass of water was still on the table. Samuel came in and started tidying up. He folded the blanket, he washed the glass, he put the chair back in place. It was strange. The cabin seemed emptier now than it had before the boy arrived, as if the brief presence of another person had revealed the extent of the loneliness that had always been there. He sat in the chair and looked out the window. The sun was high now. The desert glowed in its relentless light. That night, Samuel did something he hadn't done in years. He lit a fire outside the cabin and sat down to watch the stars. The desert sky was endless. Thousands of points of light spread over black velvet. There was something comforting about that immensity, a reminder that no matter how great a man's problems were, the universe continued to spin, indifferent and eternal. He thought about the boy. Ashki would be arriving home by now. His mother would hug him. His sister would rush to meet him. There would be tears and laughter and a party that would last until dawn. He thought about the boss. Hastin Tso, the great man. 40 years of leading his people through wars and losses and changes that no previous generation had to face, and still strong, still worthy, still able to offer friendship to a stranger who had simply done the right thing. And he thought about himself. Samuel Briggs, the desert hermit, the man who chose solitude because the company of others seemed dishonest. The man who found a dying boy and couldn't just move on. Why had he stopped? Why hadn't he just ignored the sound and gone back to his cabin? It would have been easier, safer. No one would know. Nobody would blame him, but he would know. And that somehow mattered. In the weeks that followed, Samuel's life changed in subtle but significant ways. He was still alone in his cabin, but he no longer felt isolated. Sometimes, when he went hunting or fetching water, he saw signs that others had passed that way. Horse tracks, a recently extinguished fire, a food offering left on a stone. The Navajo were true to their word. They were watching their lands, protecting him from a distance. Once, a group of bandits passed near his property. Samuel saw them camped a few miles away, clearly planning something. The next morning, they were gone. There were no signs of a struggle. There were no bodies. They had simply headed off in the opposite direction, as if something had convinced them that this was not a good place to stay. Samuel never knew exactly what happened, but he could imagine. Months later, on the first full moon of winter, Samuel did something he hadn't planned to do. He saddled his horse, packed a week's worth of supplies, and headed north. 3 days later, he arrived at the canyon that Ashki had described, the rock formation that looked like a sleeping bear, the river that was now running strong with the autumn rains, and the Navajo village that stretched across the valley. He was received as if he had been expected. Maybe it was. Hastin Tso came out of his tent and walked towards him with a smile that completely transformed his stern face. "You came. I came," Samuel said. Ashki appeared running from somewhere, her leg completely healed, her face beaming with joy. "I told them you would come. I knew." Samuel dismounted and was enveloped in a hug he didn't expect. Not just from Ashki, but from dozens of people he had never met. Women, children, warriors. Everyone wanted to touch the man who had saved the boss's grandson. That night, there was a party. Food, music, dances that told stories older than any written memory. Samuel sat next to Hastin Tso and watched, taking it all in. At some point, the boss leaned over and spoke quietly. "Solitude is a respectable choice, but it doesn't have to be permanent." Samuel looked at the old warrior, then to Ashki, who was dancing with other children around the fire, then to the starry sky that covered everything. "Maybe you're right," he said. Hastin Tso smiled. "Of course I do. I'm the boss." And the two of them laughed together under the desert stars, as the music continued and the campfire crackled, and somewhere in the mountains, a coyote howled at the moon. Samuel did not move to the village. It wasn't who he was, but he started visiting her regularly. Once a month, sometimes more. Learned words in Navajo. He taught blacksmithing techniques to young warriors. He gradually became part of something bigger than himself. Years later, when I told this story to anyone who would listen, it always ended the same way. I found a boy lost in the desert and did the only thing I could do. I took care of him until his family came to get him. It wasn't heroism. It wasn't a sacrifice. It was simply humanity. And the reward? The reward was discovering that humanity, when genuine, is always recognized. That kindness, when true, always finds its way back. That family is not just who shares your blood, but who shares your values. I lived alone for many years because I thought it was what I wanted. I discovered that what I really wanted was to be seen, be recognized, to be accepted for who I was, not for what others expected me to be. And I found it in the most unlikely place, in the middle of the desert, in a Navajo chief's tent, in the smile of a boy who I saved and who, in a way, saved me too. Sometimes life's greatest gifts come disguised as obligations. Sometimes the path out of loneliness begins with a simple act of compassion. And sometimes all we need to do is stop when we hear a sound in the desert and choose to help.